On February 18th, 1920, King Victor Emmanuel III laid the cornerstone on what is today Rome's Garbatella neighborhood. It was an exceptionally grand ceremony for the inauguration of a working-class housing project.
Concordia. That was the original name chosen by the visionary naval engineer Luigi Orlando, who had tirelessly promoted this workers' district. Orlando presided over the Ente per lo Sviluppo Marittimo, a government agency whose goal was to promote industrial and maritime activities in Italy's capital.
Among the intended residents of this Borgo Marinaro, or sailor's quarter, were dock workers. In fact, Concordia was just one part of a larger scheme to build a navigable canal connecting a vast new river port in the Ostiense industrial zone to the historic Mediterranean seaport of Ostia.
If Orlando's plans had been carried out, this would have been the transportation hub of all the goods arriving by land and from water from the Mediterranean Sea into the capital.
Can you imagine how this project would have brought great economic prosperity to the young capital of Italy? Instead, what happened?
At the last minute, the promised funds of almost 60 million lira were cut, earmarked instead for another project in northern Italy.
But the plans to build workers' housing moved forward thanks to a joint venture between the ICP, the Low Income Housing Institute, and Orlando's SMIR. Between 1920 and 1922, the first blocks were built here of what would become one of the most important examples of progressive workers' quarters, not just in Rome, but in all of Europe.
From here on this hilltop, factories, warehouses, gasworks, and power plants fill the Tiber River Valley below us. A grand staircase, still in place, connects the Ostiense industrial zone, where the harbor and docks were supposed to be built, with the new hilltop homes.
Even though the port facilities were never built, the maritime origins of Concordia were not entirely lost. In fact, the street names all refer to naval history, famous sailors, navigators, marine explorers, naval engineers, shipbuilders, and ship owners. The original name Concordia was swept aside along with the ambitious plans for the river port, to be replaced with the moniker Borgata Giardino Garbatella. Why the name Garbatella?
One theory is that the name derives from a type of vineyard that grew here on the edge of the city. Vines planted a barbata, that is, supported on an elm or maple tree. Barbata becomes Garbata, Garbatella. But another, a little bit more romantic tradition says that Garbatella gets its name from a local osteria, or a tavern on Via delle Sette Chiese, where a particularly good-natured, Garbata in Italian, hostess held court. It's a simple step to transform Garbato into a nickname for the amiable tavern keeper, La Garbatella.
Whatever its true origins, the name proved propitious. Within 10 years, the first nucleus of about 700 rooms grew to 9,000 rooms, expanding over a territory of 26 hectares. What had been until recently open countryside, seemingly far from the bustling city, was becoming a quarter with its own identity. Today, strolling through the neighborhood, it still feels like open countryside. The small villini are surrounded by vegetation.
Yes, you feel a connection to rural life, even in the architectural details, which recall flora and fauna of bucolic natural landscapes.
This is where the neighborhood began to take form, around Piazza Brin, at the top of the staircase from the Via Ostiense, with its industrial plants and its tram line to the city center.
Gustavo Giovannoni was the architect and urbanist who, together with engineer Massimo Piacentini, laid out a piano regolatore della zona, or master plan for the first 44 villette situated symmetrically facing the piazza. The little houses loosely follow the hill's topography.
This recalls countless little medieval towns in the countryside outside Rome. In fact, in these years, many poor farmers fleeing poverty and malaria migrated to the capital in hope of finding work and a better life.
The neighborhood was conceived to provide for these less fortunate residents. This mission is literally carved in stone, in the cornerstone laid by the king, which proclaims the goal to provide a peaceful and healthy shelter for the poor.
Another one of the ICP architects referred explicitly to the home as an educational tool, which must be pleasant looking itself and in its surroundings.
This pedagogy had its precedence in San Saba, the first ICP workers' quarters just inside the Aurelian walls. In both cases, the role of the vegetation is key.
It's natural that associations have been made with the Garden City movement emerging from Britain in the early 20th century, although few explicit references exist. While both Garbatella and Ebenezer Howard's Garden City principles seem set on providing the best of both worlds, the urban and the rural. Though maybe a more apt reference is not to English planning innovations, but rather to the traditional villages of the Roman countryside. There, it's easy to find this balance between urban and rural, which was sought by planners like Howard.
A common theme pursued almost religiously by the young architects hired by the ICP was to seek a varied and pittoresque composition, un insieme vario e pittoresco. This meant the use of an architectural vocabulary rich of vernacular elements. We see little towers, verandas, shared loggias, exterior staircases leading up to balconies, terraces and covered roof decks, all medieval or at least traditional features which migrated from the countryside along with the new inhabitants.
This is true, but while each villino was to appear as unique, the architects did apply rational planning to achieve this goal. In fact, they generated 8 different housing types, labeled A through I, combined both horizontally and vertically, and randomly distributed in the lots.
The houses were usually 2 stories high with 1 or 2 bedroom apartments occupying approximately 40 to 50 square meters, and they were all built and faced with traditional local Roman building materials: tufo, brick, peperino and timber.
No doubt, the ICP cared greatly about the social integration of the working classes. It recognized their important role in a radically changing Italy, which was evolving from a mainly agrarian economy to a modern industrialized one.
And blue-collar workers were fundamental to the economical rebirth of Italy. Providing the lower income class with decent housing was a first step towards that future. Innocenzo Costantini, head of the ICP, spoke of elevating the working classes, nobilitare le case popolari. The ICP made a major investment, up to 10 million lira at the time, to ensure quality construction. Clearly, they believed that such investments have a long-term payback.
But what kind of urban form should this new neighborhood have? We know that Rome lacked a model for workers' quarters. At this point, most urban poor lived either in self-built shacks or in these dark, narrow barrack blocks like those of San Lorenzo. Though the single-family villini were delightful, they were simply too expensive and too low density to satisfy the city's urgent needs for housing the masses.
So it's not surprising that in the years following Giovannoni's first master plan, taller buildings followed. In the next lots, in 1922 to 23, 5 to 6 story high palazzine were built, and the private orchards and gardens were replaced by common semi-private courtyards. Still saying that the verde is the miglior decoro, the green is the best ornamentation, remains valid. Look at the beautiful magnolia trees that adorn the protected inner yards and the children's playgrounds.
This new denser housing typology, the Case del Tipo Economico, has smaller units, but hosts more collective spaces, like the botteghe, the workshops for artisans, the meeting rooms for the workers, and various commercial shops. On a closer look, we note the traditional blocks are broken up into smaller pieces. They shifted and curved into the lot. This simple move allows for much more sunlight and air into the courtyards and into the apartments.
There are sophisticated typological innovations in these seemingly simple urban forms for this young generation of architects employed by the ICP, like Marconi, Sabatini, Palmerini, Vicario, Sforza, Nori, Polidori, Nicolosi and Trotta, and others. Most of them are still in their early 20s. Garbatella was the ultimate experimental design workshop.
Composed of 62 lotti with over 3,000 apartments, this will become the biggest of the Roman low-income neighborhoods and a true laboratory of urban experimentation.
These aerial views of lots 13 to 16 show the different ways the architects arrange the housing units around inner courtyards. The composition ranges from informal and casual to symmetrical or even monumental geometries.
The pressure to provide more housing continues to accelerate, and even these denser housing types soon no longer suffice. By 1924, case rapide are launched. These are even less elaborate, with simpler lines, no balconies or loggias, and as the name implies, they're built quickly with cheaper construction materials and methods.
By the mid-20s, the fascist regime is in full power and carrying out demolitions, the so-called sventramenti in the city center. Soon the housing needs are exacerbated by the emergency of the sbaraccati, the very low-income residents evicted from these big fascist urban renewal projects. In outlining zones of the capital, new projects for the displaced are thrown together. Garbatella is no exception. Between 1925 and 1927, 500 such apartments fill lots 28 through 37. There are no bottega or no shops here, no services, just bare bones housing structures. A few essential types are mass-produced, combined in multiple ways and loosely grouped around the borders of the lots.
At the same time, in 1925 to 27, a very different typology, or the villini a riscatto, rent-to-buy houses, starts to fill up lots 52 through 55. These quite elaborate little villas are also produced in series. They create a harmonious little village with a lovely central piazza, Piazza Randaccio, achieved by pivoting the four houses of the corner lots.
In Piazza Masdea, the same principle is applied. See this bird's eye view, creating a small town feel for the residents. Or have a look at Piazza Sapeto, where two pairs of symmetrical building types turn around to create this beautiful space on top of the hill, and where the arched bridges create gateways into and from the surrounding lots.
I find most interesting the urban trick invented by these ICP architects, where they cut the urban corners to recess and enlarge the street space. By smoothing, carving, subtracting the edges of the lots, they create exceptional urban spaces. There's something Baroque in this device.
Exactly. Look at how in Piazza Santa Rosia, these two concave, V-shaped buildings create a marvelous Baroque-like entrance to the neighborhood.
Altogether, this type of architecture, recalling the nobility of Baroque Rome, served to achieve the stated goal, nobilitare, or elevate the working classes.
In Garbatella, stylistically speaking, anything goes. Each lot seems to draw from a different chapter of the city's architectural history books. Once you enter through the gates of the Garbatella, it feels like going down the rabbit hole, entering Alice's wonderland of architectural fantasies.
Many buildings feel vernacular, referencing rustic traditions, while others strive for a grander neoclassical presence. Architect Giovannoni refers to the Cinquecento, the Renaissance. Sabatini plays with medieval vernacular styles. Palmerini pulls out some Romanesque, and Marconi chooses a mix of medieval and vernacular. Vicario constructs a veritable Baroque palace, and Nicolosi even goes for an avant-garde rationalist style.
Constructed mostly within a single decade, these diverse buildings also testify to the evolution and the personal growth of the young designers. For instance, we can see easily how the works of Innocenzo Sabatini evolve in style and craft. He starts enthusiastically with medieval revival in Lotto 2, then switches to a neo-Baroque arrangement in Lotto 13, and becomes very neoclassical with the kindergarten and the cinema, ending in a futurist architecture with high-rising staircases in glass and steel. Besides the formal research, Sabatini's mind focuses on unique building types and unusual urban space. His V, T, or Y-shaped corner buildings become a sort of brand identity of the neighborhood. You see in the plan that the staircases work like a hinge to adjust the building wings to the acute angles of the lot. In lot 27B and C, the architects Trotta and Sabatini take this approach one step further, recessing the volumes from the street, a research which ultimately culminates in the huge housing blocks of the alberghi suburbani in the lots 41 through 44.
These large blocks are built only 9 years after Sabatini's first vernacular-style constructions. Here he reaches a stylistic maturity and expresses an architectural language of a futuristic, expressionistic style, with practically no precedents.
The several thousand residents who moved to Garbatella were mostly young working-class families and in need of schools and kindergartens right from the start. Sabatini is commissioned to build the Casa dei Bimbi, completed in 1926. The kindergarten, named after Luzzatti, the first president of the ICP, lays on top of the hill, surrounded by a large park area, the former Villa Sergardi. Sabatini designed this school with a reference to Greek temples, worshipping the gods of education, helping to fight the all too prevalent illiteracy of workers' families at the time. In the early 1930s, the elementary and middle school was added, situated on top of the opposite hill on Piazza Sauli. Following the same social aim, a women's house, the Dopolavoro Femminile, was built nearby. Women would gather here after work, use the library, or attend classes to learn to read and write.
Education and culture were both key, and this realization led to the construction of a theater, the Palladium. But education also meant training workers towards proper hygiene. The homes had running, drinking water, toilets connected to an efficient sewer system, all very important to avoid cholera outbreaks or other diseases that had tragically swept through neighborhoods like San Lorenzo.
Yet even in Garbatella, the dwellings still lacked showers or bathtubs. Thus, the public bath building, designed again by Sabatini, served as an essential health as well as social function. Here you could also get a shave or get your hair done, just like in thermal baths once upon a time.
In fact, look at the building facade with its vaulted structures. They're reminiscent of the ancient thermal baths of Caracalla. And inside the halls, the paving and the shower stalls were lavishly decorated with marble like in imperial times. The overhang above the lower floor took inspiration from the Casa di Diana in Ostia Antica.
And as in the ancient baths, there are heating systems installed below the floor.
On weekends, the Garbatella resident typically went to the baths, then got dressed up to go to the movies in the Teatro Palladium. One would meet in Piazza Romano, where these public buildings were both designed by Sabatini in 1928 to 30. People gathered not far from the market at nearby coffee shops and pizzerias. To improve hygiene, laundry facilities were provided in all the condominiums, and all the basements had sinks for clothes washing. In the courtyards, specific areas were designated for drying clothes.
Seeing plenty of laundry blowing outdoors in the wind and in the sun was a big achievement in terms of hygiene. Laundry was so prevalent at Garbatella that it was nicknamed the Capitale dei Panni, the laundry capital.
The courtyards also provided large playgrounds where children could play independently but be easily watched by the parents from their kitchen windows.
In fact, kids could run all over the hilly and quiet neighborhood, in and out of the courtyards, giving us a glimpse of how wonderfully safe and healthy city life can be. Even today, with the fourth generation of working families inhabiting Garbatella, people who grew up here feel truly part of this large, unique community.
Questi cortili erano delle vere e proprie agorà, delle piazze. C'era il momento della scuola, poi c'era il momento del pomeriggio, poi c'era il momento dell'incontro, forse anche di qualche primissimo amore.
La morfologia urbana debba consentire di sviluppare, come dire, un doppio livello, quindi di una vita pubblica nelle strade che collegano i vari isolati e una vita privata ma in qualche modo pubblica a sua volta fra gli abitanti delle varie case all'interno delle corti.
Questi luoghi hanno fatto parte di un eco, di una specie di racconto armonico che la Garbatella ha interpretato perfettamente, cioè è stata capace di dare suggestioni, emozioni che ancora permangono.
When Mussolini came to power, he changed the leadership and put one of his own men, Calzabini, in charge of the ICP. More funds were made available, and indeed the first fascist decade turned out to be a vital period for low-income housing projects.
I suppose there was a hidden agenda to detect possible communist resistance and to control riots amongst the working class. Ideally, the portiere of the lots were carefully selected from the members of the fascist party, and they could report if disloyalty was evident.
The regime further took up the chance to show the world how innovative they were in providing workers housing. In fact, in 1929, Calzabini organizes the 12th International Congress for Housing and Master Plans. He invites the best architects of the Scuola Romana, people like Aschieri, De Renzi, Cancellotti, Vietti, Marchi, and Marconi, to participate by proposing model houses.
2 years earlier, the Weissenhof Siedlung internationally had showcased its avant-garde solutions of partially prefab, good quality housing. And now Rome responds with a more traditional classical proposal. The triangular layout of single duplex villini is on axis with a central laundry hanging area and the gardens. In the second courtyard, the axis continues, spinning around the central flower bed, ending at the pergola, covering the playground area in the southeast corner.
All was done very quickly. In only 1 month, the plans for 13 houses were drafted, and within another 4 months, the construction of the modern workers' housing model was completed, just in time for the exhibition.
The fascist rhetoric was to offer visitors, Italian and foreign alike, a practical example of Rome and Italy's contributions to the Garden City theme. The foreign press reacted positively to the simplicity and the modernity of the architecture and praised it as an enlightening example of modern rationalist constructions.
Unlike the German examples, Rome's model village is rich with historical references. For instance, Mario de Renzi's Villino displays a classical loggia like Serlio. The materials used were cheap and conventional, but the architecture was no longer vernacular. Typological research has borne its fruit. Simplicity and clarity prevail in plan and section. Bright, sunny, healthy, white buildings showcase Italy's achievements and education towards hygiene in contemporary workers' housing.
Speaking of avant-garde modernity, we must mention one particular building in Lotto 27, designed by an extraordinary architect, Giuseppe Nicolosi. Though less famous than Renzi or Aschieri, his housing proposal is by far the spearhead of the rationalist approach in the Garbatella, and not only.
The large housing blocks on the northeast end of the neighborhood were built to hastily provide more shelters for the displaced families evicted during Mussolini's large demolitions in the city center.
Calzabini, fascist member and president in charge in the late 20s, came up with the idea to erect these temporary suburban hotels, which he defined as alberghi di transito. The alberghi were supposed to host the evicted for a short time, but as often happens in Rome, the temporary turned out to become permanent. The architect Sabatini, though not at all happy with the notion of short-term housing, accepted the task and carried out the request to construct the alberghi suburbani, suburban hotels, in 1927-30. Each of the 4 lots, 41 to 44, is named according to its color: albergo rosso, albergo bianco, giallo e beige.
Compared to the first workers' homes near Piazza Brin, the urban scale is dramatically different. We see a radical shift from an idyllic, romantic idea of the low-density village, surrounded by lovely gardens, to the production of mass workers' superblocks. These dormitories ultimately hosted about 1,000 families. On the lower floors, individuals would be assigned to female or male dorms and share the bathrooms. On the upper floors, families would each get a private room, but they would share baths and sometimes living areas at the end of the hallways. Collective spaces like the refectories, the nursery or kindergarten, the school, the chapel, the laundry facilities, kitchens, a health point, storage facilities, and open-air playgrounds were accessible to all residents, and each of the 4 housing towers constituted a residential town on its own.
Or should we rather say a factory town? Did you notice the tower clock on top of the Albergo Rosso? The bell rang when it was time to eat, time to sleep, bedtime, time to wake up and go to work. A sort of mechanization of workers' lives.
Garbatella's blocks are less static. They're more vertical, and they have a kind of dynamic, futuristic expression. Sabatini must have admired Sant'Elia's Città Nuova, with freestanding stairs and elevators speeding to the top floors of these tall, stepped housing towers. You see how ICP used the model of tall terraced housing blocks also in other neighborhoods, for instance in Via Tiburtino 2, another marvelous design, again by Sabatini.
What impresses us most about Sabatini and his colleagues is their assiduous research and experimentation, which ultimately leads to unprecedented solutions. In plan, the wonderful, elegant and unusually sculpted Y and T-shaped high-rises are striking. Dynamic, slim creatures opposite of the static courtyard blocks step back, open up, and cross over the streets, creating a particular wide urban space.
Motion is key. We can imagine crowds of workers flooding into the streets and see the traffic spinning around the large piazzas during rush hours. Staircases become dynamic too.
Natural light falls like in modern cathedrals through the filigrane skylights. For the towers, Sabatini uses new materials such as concrete and steel and employs the latest technologies for the structures. Thin reinforced beams created translucent domes and cross joints in concrete plate the ceilings. The dome of the refectory is designed like the ceiling of the Pantheon, and here light filters through hundreds of skylights which perforate the coffered squares.
Tragically, during the bombardments of March 7, 1944, explosives hit a refectory, killing over 50 people, including children from the nursery. The bomb hit at 11:25 a.m. The clock stopped at that very moment and wasn't adjusted for decades, remaining as a testimony to the horrors of the Nazi occupation of Rome. Garbatella was anti-fascist before and stayed anti-fascist during and after the war. Many residents fought actively in the resistance, and some were beaten in the alberghi for their political views. It was known as a quartiere rosso, since most of the workers were part of the Communist Party, and still today, it's mostly left of center.
Rosso and giallo are the colors of Garbatella, and more so the color of the flag of the Roma soccer team, which you see often hanging out of the windows or on street art illustrating famous players around the neighborhood.
Garbatella feels like a big happy community center for a boisterous extended family.
Most of this beautiful neighborhood lacked basic maintenance for over 100 years. Gardens seem abandoned too, unless volunteer work is done by the inhabitants itself. Most apartments still belong though to the IRCP. Those which are not are sold quickly, not to workers, but to a higher social class, leading to gentrification.
Roma Tre University invested in, saved, and restored the theater and the public baths after years of abandonment. It's wonderful to see people going to see movies or live performances there again.
Il dovere di Roma Tre era quello di fare operazioni che servissero per l'università, ma contemporaneamente per la città, perché insieme alla popolazione sono entrati nel quartiere anche gli studenti e quindi sono stati un motore per vitalizzare ulteriormente un quartiere, una zona.
All told, the urban reality of Garbatella is, and hopefully will remain, an extraordinary example of a well-designed neighborhood.